I burst into the conference room and cut off my own briefing when Connor Hayes swaggered in like he owned the place, smiled too bright and shoes too clean. He didn't ask to be let in, didn't knock, and he didn't care about the clearance level on the files spread across the table. He dropped his phone into his pocket and said, "My father wants to see you now." No apology, no pause, just that line like it was an order from God. The room went cold. Colonel Reed, a straight-backed Army officer, Dr. Emily Carter from DARPA, and Commander Blake from Naval Intelligence all looked at him like he had invaded a foxhole. I offered to reschedule the classified discussion, but they stood up stiff and left, faces tight with annoyance and distrust. Connor plopped into the head chair like he owned the chair, like he'd just won a prize. I felt my jaw tighten and a low, familiar click in my chest, the kind of military déjà vu that warns you this isn't accidental. He leaned back, elbows on the armrests, grinning like he'd played a hand and won. "Look," he said, "this'll be quick. My father wants to see you upstairs." Now, no explanation, no reason. I kept my voice level. "We were in the middle of a classified briefing," I said. "There are 3 people in this room who shouldn't be moved without a damn good reason." He shrugged, like security clearances were a nuisance. "It'll be fine," he says, "it's urgent." I saw the way his eyes flicked to the folders, to the whiteboard with key exchange diagrams, and I knew the interruption was deliberate. He wanted control of the narrative. He wanted to unsettle me. There are people who mistake being loud for being powerful. Connor was loud and polished enough that some people took him seriously. I had spent 24 years in Navy signals intelligence, and I read rooms the way some men read maps. You learn to spot a setup. This was a setup. He wasn't merely rude, he was testing me. He wanted to see how I'd react. He wanted to see if I'd lose my cool, hand him leverage, or reveal something useful in a hastily packed temper. I stayed calm because losing my temper on a whim was exactly what he was betting on. "Connor," I said, "if your father wants to see me, he can call for a proper meeting. This isn't how you handle people with access to live systems." He flashed a laugh that didn't touch his eyes. "Relax, this is business. Besides, it's better for you to come smiling." He pushed a termination letter across the table without even a nod. The air got thinner. The letter said I was terminated effective immediately, no severance, no appeal. He had the power moved down like a practiced actor. "Sign here," he said lightly, as if I were agreeing to meet him for lunch. I didn't sign. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't give him the exact satisfaction he wanted. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. That small act was a refusal and a message. He smiled, and he meant it to look casual, but it wasn't casual at all. It was calculated. The corporate hierarchy had swallowed him and given him a halo. He thought that halo made him invincible. He didn't know contracts like I did. He didn't know the clause tucked into my agreement because of a man named Harold Bishop who believed engineers and the work they built deserved protection. But Connor didn't need to know that yet. He just needed to believe he'd won, and for a moment he did. He wanted to see me rattled, and part of me wanted to give him the drama he craved. Instead, I kept my hands on the table and my face neutral, and let the moment stretch until it began to feel like a trap waiting to spring. "You're making a scene," he said, standing. "Come upstairs now." There was an edge to him that didn't belong to the office. It had an entitlement that smelled like a man who'd never had to fight for a thing. I stood too. I told him, "Fine, but you walk me to the elevator and you stay within my line of sight." He blinked, taken aback for a second, then laughed in a way meant to dismiss the rule. "I'm not a babysitter, old man." I didn't answer. I kept my hand on the folder that held the blueprints of what we'd built, because that folder had saved lives. I kept my mouth shut for the same reason. Connor misread silence as weakness. He was wrong. We walked out through a lobby that smelled of coffee and new money. HR watched us go with that corporate politeness that usually means they've already decided which box to check on your exit paperwork. I could feel the presence of the 3 decision makers like a weight behind my shoulder, the way their annoyance lingered in the room even after they'd left. It wasn't just about my job. It was about a piece of technology that decided whether ships stayed hidden, whether messages reached the right hands, whether people lived. Connor treated it like another asset to pawn. To him, it was a line in a balance sheet. To me, it was a responsibility I had carried since my enlistment, the duty to keep comms safe when lives depended on them. He opened his mouth to make another dismissive joke as we reached the elevator, and the moment the doors closed, I watched him closely. He didn't know the clause in my contract would activate in 24 hours. He didn't know how the company had been built around trust and slow decisions and engineers who stayed longer than investors wanted. He assumed he could cut me loose and the rest would be clean. He assumed he could erase the work like it was a bad memo. He had no idea he was starting a clock he couldn't stop. I didn't say that to him then. I watched the city roll by outside the window, and I kept my quiet for reasons that weren't just about leverage. I kept quiet because sometimes the sharpest weapon is patience. Voices boomed down the marble hallway outside CEO Charles Hayes's corner office, sharp and desperate like men wrestling with bad money. I could hear the anger through the door and the way their words cut off when someone called a name that wasn't supposed to be said out loud. Ridgefield had built its future on a single bet, the merger with Marlowe Defense. That deal looked good on paper only because of the encryption suite I'd spent years building. My architecture wasn't some academic exercise. It was built for military scale, big key exchanges, quantum-resistant math, and hardware security modules I designed to survive field shocks and power glitches. Half the company's valuation was tied directly to those lines of code and those metal boxes. Lose them and the slides mean nothing. Connor slid the termination letter across Charles's desk like he was placing a tip jar. The paper had the company's letterhead and the precise corporate language you'd expect. Immediate termination, no severance, no appeal. The effective date was today, stamped so it would take effect 24 hours before the annual performance payout hit my account. Sorry for the quick interruption. If you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave comment below. It really helps the channel grow. Alright, let's jump back into the story. That payout was more than money. It was the mechanical trigger for a clause someone named Harold Bishop had once insisted on back when the company was a handful of people and a stubborn founder who respected engineers. The clause was a tiny legal gear that would change ownership of the core IP for a small window after payout. Connor didn't know about it. Connor thought firing me today would cut Ridgefield's liabilities and hand him a clean path to the merger. He was trying to erase me on paper before the paperwork did anything. I watched Charles avoid my eyes when the letter landed in front of me, and I saw the way he kept trying to look like a man steering a ship when inside he felt the hull groan. "This is standard," he said in a half-hearted way like the word could drag truth into place. "Corporate restructuring, you understand." His voice cracked. He tried to make it a business decision and not a family favor done by a son who wanted a medal at his father's expense. I signed the letter without protest because arguing wouldn't change a kid with a lawyer and a handheld scanner. Walking out cleanly would save me time and keep me composed. Executives follow orders for worse reasons than this. I've seen men swallow pride and do them for less than 10 years' pay under pressure. I wouldn't add my voice to that chorus. They walked me out with all the sterile politeness of corporate exits, HR forms, a checkbox, a polite escort through the lobby that felt like a parade to a firing squad. Connor watched like a man who just closed a deal. He smiled too broadly like the world owed him something. The security badge on my chest clicked off when they stripped it. The act was symbolic in a place built of symbols. But a badge can't own an algorithm. A badge can't override a contract clause that sits quiet until a timer ticks. I'd learned long ago that systems of power are full of ceremonies that feel final but are actually fragile. This was one of those. Connor wanted the finality. He wanted to make me small in front of the suits. He didn't know the clause or he didn't care to check. Outside, the hallway smelled like old coffee and nervous money. I walked past the lobby fish tank and the wall of framed fundraising rounds, past employees who watched with that mix of curiosity and relief that comes when the noose tightens on someone else. The press had already smelled blood. A low hum of phones and quiet conversations followed me like a shadow. I thought briefly about Claire, my daughter, and about how this would look to her. She was a sophomore fighting her own fights at Columbia. I couldn't let this be some sudden panic that ate her security. I kept my face steady because panic is contagious and not useful. On the outside of the building, I sat on a bench and unfolded the letter again, feeling the weight of the signature like a stone in my palm. There was no drama in the act. It was a clean line in a messy mess. The legal engine of Ridgefield didn't know yet what Harold's clause would do in 24 hours. The company had built itself on a culture that valued speed and shiny metrics, and that culture bred people like Connor who thought the world bent to their will. He'd used his father's name and his father's power to erase a person he thought replaceable. He didn't understand that things you build with hands and knowledge don't always go down with a single decree. I put the paper back in my pocket and walked home because there was nothing to be gained by staying and nothing to be lost by leaving the room they'd staged. The clock started its quiet tick, and I watched the city move through a late winter gray. The timer on my kitchen counter blinked like a bomb, 23:59:58. I had written that little program years ago to track the annual payout that would flip a legal switch Hal, founder, had quietly wedged into my contract. Over bourbon one night he'd told me he didn't trust boards to protect the people who actually built things, and he'd slipped in a conditional transfer tied to my bonus. Back then it was a joke saved for late nights. For 10 years it did nothing but sit there like an old key in a drawer. Now it mattered the way a lit fuse matters. My phone started buzzing the way a coastline hums before a storm. Former colleagues reached out first, short and sharp. "You okay? What's up? Headhunters left polite voicemails trying to sound casual about immediate leadership roles. Then Daniel Marlowe's assistant called, formal and careful as a man walking on thin ice. When Daniel himself came on the line, his voice was brisk, but there was hunger under it. "We need certainty," he said. "If you're out of Ridgefield at close, our terms change." "Are you available?" He wanted to know if firing me made the merger cleaner or if I was suddenly marketable. Connor had tried to erase me before the window triggered, but he'd done something worse. He put my availability on display to people who actually understood the tech and the market. I set my coffee down and listened to 4 different scenarios run through my head. 1, I walk away and let Ridgefield hemorrhage into bankruptcy. The tech gets parceled out in court and half the people who built it scatter. 2, I license aggressively to the highest bidder and take the team to a place with deep pockets and national reach. 3, I refuse offers until I can make demands that preserve the product and the engineers who kept it alive. Each scenario had trade-offs: money, control, ethics, loyalties. Claire's tuition factored into every calculation, and the thought of her bills unpaid pricked at me like a splinter. I called an old Navy friend, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hale, because when lives are on the line, you ask those who still wear uniforms. "If this code ends up in the wrong place," he said, "we're the ones that take the short end." He didn't mean Ridgefield stock, he meant subs that go silent and crews who count on that silence. I told him the basics and kept the legal stuff thin. He offered what military men always offer: options and a network. "Keep it tight," he said, "don't be cute. Get what protects the mission." His voice put the right phrase into my mouth: mission. Daniel called back with an offer that valued the tech in a way my bonus never could. He spoke of licenses, 5-year guarantees, and a team built inside his walls with resources to do more than just patch. He also said something unexpected: "We want you to lead it." He wanted me and the people who knew how the suite worked in real conditions, not just lines on a spec sheet. I listened and I asked for time. He didn't argue. He knew he was talking to the leverage, not the ego. Hal's clause wasn't just legal cleverness. It was a statement about responsibility. If a company tries to throw away what keeps people safe, someone should be able to protect it. That stuck with me as the offers stacked up in my inbox. Ridgefield's counsel started calling, not with threats so much as panic-struck pleas. "We can settle, we can negotiate, please." I let them talk while I thought about more important things than money. The engineers who'd sleep better knowing their work wouldn't be sold off in a bankruptcy auction, and the sailors who counted on encrypted channels to get home. My street was cold and quiet when I took a walk to clear my head. People pass you on the sidewalk without recognizing the gears shifting under your feet. I rehearsed demands out loud into my scarf. No Connor anywhere near this tech, public acknowledgement of the damage done, guarantees for the engineers who wanted to come, continued stewardship of military contracts. The words tasted like iron and felt heavier than any check I could cash. This was a steering wheel I'd been handed, not a prize, and I planned to use it. Back at my table, the timer ticked closer to 0 and my phone vibrated again. A reporter asked for comment, another headhunter called with a ludicrous number, and Daniel sent a short message: "We can talk now." I put my hand over the counter where the small LED blinked and felt the impulse to snap and sign something just to end the noise. Instead, I breathed. I remembered nights in the Navy where patience did more than a plan ever could. Hal had built a safeguard that relied on simple mechanics and steady performance, and now those mechanics were about to change everything. The clock kept counting down, and I kept building the list of conditions I'd demand before anyone could touch what I'd helped create. I woke to the phone before coffee, the city still gray and wet, and the headlines already doing damage. Ridgefield stock slid overnight like a man losing his footing, and the financial press smelled weakness and moved fast. I watched the tickers for a minute while the kettle boiled and thought about how a paper clause had suddenly become a fulcrum. I am man, and I tell this story because sometimes patience and a little legal thinking change everything. I stay the only man in this room who thinks slow and watches the gears. Connor called before 9, voice thin with the kind of panic you can't fake when your father's name and your future are on the line. "There was confusion," he said. "We didn't mean," he kept fumbling, trying to make it sound like a clerical mistake that a refund would fix. I told him flat, "You never read the contracts you signed. You made a decision you were never trained to make." He offered quick remedies, like someone offering a band-aid for a severed tendon. My old job back pay, retention bonuses generous enough to make a CFO salivate. I listened without flinching and told him no. You don't shove a man out the door and expect him to come back as if nothing happened. That wasn't the point. I laced up my shoes and ran because muscle calms the brain in ways coffee cannot. I ran past the memorials that hold names of men who never made it home, and past the Defense Department where uniforms still stand like silent judges. My chest tightened with every step thinking of Claire, my daughter, and her tuition bills. And on the other side, my mind counted the engineers who'd poured nights into firmware and pull requests, people whose livelihoods were suddenly fragile. Running cleared the noise and focused me on what mattered. Protecting what we'd built and the people who kept it alive, not just cashing a check to paper over someone else's arrogance. My phone blew up while I ran, calls lit up from Rathon Defense, Northrop, and a half-dozen medium-sized contractors who suddenly had a problem Ridgefield couldn't solve without me. They offered everything from short-term contracts to equity partnerships and promises to keep the engineering staff intact. One recruiter practically begged, "We can put you in charge, you can pick who comes." Another voice, clear and businesslike, said, "We want continuity. We want to prevent the tech from being lost in bankruptcy." For the first time, the market wasn't just watching, it was offering me options. Connor's attempt at erasing me had done something he hadn't planned. It put my value on the open market. When I stopped by the river to catch my breath, my mind ran through deals like a worn deck of cards. Cash today would secure Claire's tuition and a calm life. Licensing the tech gave me control without the direct corporate chokehold. Taking a leadership role at a larger firm meant resources and reach, but also new bosses and different politics. Every option required a promise to the people who had written the lines of code and soldered the boards, the engineers who trusted me to keep their work meaningful. I refused anything that felt like abandoning them or selling the tech short. Back home, messages stacked into threads and negotiations became a chorus. Daniel Marlowe called again, more measured, offering an exclusive license or an acquisition that would keep the team intact and guarantee long-term contracts for military programs. "We want stewardship, not pillage," he said. The language mattered. He offered equity, a seat at the table, and the resources to scale the suite for more systems. Other callers wanted quick purchases, short-term gains, or conditions that would dismantle the team. I filtered offers like someone sorting tools at a workbench. Keep the sharp ones, pass on the flimsy. By noon, I had a plan forming that felt like an oath. No Connor near the tech, no secret sales while engineers are unpaid, and a public admission that his behavior risked national programs. I would demand job guarantees for the engineers who wanted to come, licensing terms that protected military work, and a seat at any negotiation table. I wasn't motivated by spite. I was motivated by duty. The people who count on our work didn't get a vote in corporate games. I called Daniel back and laid out the first set of conditions, and he answered in the way men who knew how to value stability do. He listened, then made room. After the calls, I walked past the lobby one more time out of force of habit. The building felt different now, smaller in my memory. Investors and headlines would write the obituary for Ridgefield if that's what the market chose. For me, this was about keeping a mission intact and making sure the people who built it weren't left with nothing. Connor had tried to cut me loose to clear a path for a merger. Instead, he had handed me leverage on a silver plate. The game had changed, and I planned to play for the right stakes. I am man, and when Charles Hayes, the CEO, cornered me outside my building, he looked like a man who had lost the map he always pretended to own. He didn't get loud. He got small and earnest, the kind of apology that wants to be a bargain. "Come back," he begged. "I'll remove Connor from operational duties. We'll make good on anything you've lost. We'll fix this." He spoke fast, like a man trying to stack furniture before a storm hits the house. I stared at him because pleading and power look different when mixed. He admitted the merger might fail without the encryption suite and without me. That admission was the sound of a lever being pulled in public. I kept quiet long enough for him to feel the weight of truth. I told him plainly, "There is nothing for you to fix." I explained the thing he didn't want to understand in his panic. Hal's clause triggers automatically when the annual bonus hits my account. It isn't a board decision. It's a simple, dumb piece of contract logic that runs without sentiment. In a few hours, the ownership of the core IP would switch to me for the short window Hal designed. He checked the contract on his phone right there, fingers shaking, and when he scrolled to the clause, his face turned pale like a man seeing bad weather at sea. It wasn't theatrics. It was corporate math catching up to human error. His legal team began to scramble like a crew who finally noticed the hull cracking. Calls came in the rhythm of corporate panic. General counsel, outside counsel, compliance, someone with a spreadsheet that tried to rewrite history in green cells. They offered settlements that sounded like parlor tricks, stock options that only existed if the company survived, severance packages tied to non-disclosure agreements, bonuses that required me to sign away any claim to protect the engineers. I listened to their offers in the same way I listened to weather reports in a hurricane, useful only for deciding whether to board up or run. I declined them all because every offer came with strings that would strangle what mattered: the engineers, the product, and the defense work that saved lives. I sat down on the stoop of my building and ate a plain turkey and Swiss sandwich because food that tastes like nothing keeps your head clear. It was deliberate. No celebration, no drama, just bread and meat and the tick of a small, honest timer. The little program on my counter was counting down and I let it. If you rush a good decision to skimp on the consequences, you lose more than money. I thought about Claire and tuition bills, sure, but also about the young engineers who'd sleep better knowing their code wouldn't be sold to the highest bidder who planned to gut it. I thought about the sailors and the field teams who needed encryption they could trust. Those thoughts were louder than the offers. Ridgefield pushed press releases. They drafted talking points that tried to make the moment look like prudent management. They arranged interviews where Charles would say the right things from the right podium. None of it changed the slow legal mechanics Hal had set in motion years ago when he was CEO and had the leeway to act like a guardian. Hal's clause was less about spite and more about protecting people who build things the hard way. It was designed to kick in when corporate speed met human cost. That morning, it did what it was supposed to do. It forced an hour of reckoning. Messages kept coming from potential suitors and partners, each trying to outbid or outpromise the other. Daniel Marlowe called again, steadier now, offering the kind of stewardship that kept the engineers intact and promised long-term contracts for military programs. Other offers smelled of quick cash and faster exits. I chose to focus on the ones that preserved the team and the mission. I wrote a short list of demands that felt like an oath. No role for Connor in any future of the tech, public acknowledgement of the damage done, guarantees of employment for engineers who wanted to move, and licensing terms that protected military commitments. The list wasn't vindictive. It was practical. When the timer hit 0, I watched an automated notice land in my account, and then the legal documents follow, simple and unembellished. Transfer complete. A mechanical action completed what words and suits had tried to scramble. The company's stock wavered and the press turned the corner from business gossip to a story about stewardship and corporate miscalculation. Marlowe's people were the first to call with an offer that matched my conditions: license, structure, equity, and job offers for the team. Ridgefield's offers, the settlement numbers, and the glossy promises fell flat next to a plan that protected people and programs. I signed the transfer paperwork after making sure the demands were understood. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because someone had given me the ability to keep something that mattered out of the hands of people who valued it only as a line item. Charles left with a statement and a quieter gait. Connor's access got revoked, and his role shrank into an obituary of entitlement. I walked into a new set of negotiations with a list and a team in mind, thinking about the future, about Claire, and about the simple truths Hal had taught me. Read your contracts, know your values, and when you can, protect what you build. The little chime sounded like a starting gun. Transfer complete, my system announced at 1647, and the legal papers landed in my inbox with stupid, merciless efficiency. I am man and I watched the line that mattered most. Encryption Suite v39, all rights transferred to me individually. The numbers on Ridgefield's ticker went sideways and then straight down. Trading stopped and people started calling it a rout. It felt like watching a ship list after someone cut a critical support beam. Except this time, I wasn't the one being abandoned. Daniel Marlowe, the CEO of Marlowe Defense, called within minutes. His voice came through direct and sharp, the kind of calm men with resources use when they want something important. "We saw the transfer," he said. "Listen, we want to license this directly from you. We want to hire your team. We'll give you control and meaningful equity. Tell me what you need." His tone wasn't greedy, it was practical and fast-moving. He knew the tech and he knew the mission. I could hear the excitement under his corporate measured voice, but it was the right kind of excitement. The kind that thinks about long-term use, not quick profit. I told him what mattered first. I said, "If you're serious, you need the people who built it, not just a transfer of rights. My engineers have to come with any deal that touches the suite." He didn't hesitate. "Bring them," he said. "We'll make offers they can't refuse. We want stewardship, not strip mining." Then he asked about my role. He wanted me to lead the program, which was tempting in a way that felt like responsibility instead of ego. He offered a sizable minimum guarantee over 5 years, guaranteed contracts for military programs, and stock that actually meant something. The dollar signs were big, but I wasn't there for the numbers alone. I was there for the people and for the work that kept sailors and field teams alive. Negotiation began like a slow tightening. I told him my 3 non-negotiables and I watched how quickly he met them with a professional's efficiency. First, Connor must never have access to the tech or any operational role now or ever. Second, Charles, the CEO, must publicly acknowledge the damage done and apologize in a way that doesn't blur the truth. Third, any Ridgefield engineer who wants a job must be offered one with protections for their current stock vesting and reasonable relocation packages. Daniel listened and he agreed after a pause that sounded like him running the numbers and the optics in his head. Permanent ban on Connor, he said. Public acknowledgement, job offers for the team. We'll put it in writing. Hearing those words out loud felt like someone finally translating a promise into a tool. I pressed harder on the language around the engineering offers. No bait and switch, I said. No lowball offers that force people into a corner where they lose everything. He replied, we'll backdate vesting where appropriate, we'll fund relocation, we'll sign on for 5 years of guaranteed work. The 5-year minimum mattered because it wasn't a quick flip. It was a commitment to build, not to monetize and move on. That made it worth considering. There were smaller points I pushed on too. Creative control for the team on roadmaps that touched classified systems, a clause that forbade any sale of the suite to foreign entities without express consent, and explicit language that ensured military contracts wouldn't be fragmented across vendors until the core kept its integrity. Daniel's legal team started drafting language as we spoke, and his engineers asked for access to our test harnesses and build artifacts. We want continuity, he said. We don't want to slow down what works. I liked that answer because it matched what I had always believed. Continuity saves lives more often than flashy pivots. Outside, Ridgefield scrambled. Press releases looped like static, and their lawyers sent frantic emails that read like trying to staple fog to a memo. They offered settlements, stock carrots, and confidential buyouts, but the offers all smelled like attempts to paper over the harm. I didn't take any of them because their terms didn't protect the people who actually did the work. They looked at me like a problem to be solved and not a gatekeeper to something larger. When Daniel's team put formal numbers on the table, I took a slow breath and ran them past my list of priorities. Claire's tuition was on my mind, sure, and the security of a steady paycheck matters to any father, but my bigger concerns stayed the same. Give the tech a home that values it beyond quarterly returns and protect the engineers who built it. Daniel's proposal let me keep creative control and gave the team real security, so I began to sketch a path forward. We drafted the letter of intent that afternoon, the one that said plainly, license to Marlowe under conditions that protect the mission, hire the team under fair terms, and permanently bar Connor from any operational access. Connor's name was a footnote that would appear later in filings where his actions got called out and consequences were spelled in ink. For now, I had leverage, and I used it to carve out a future where the tech could continue to protect lives and where the people who built it wouldn't be left in the cold. The market could argue about stock values and the press could spin headlines, but in the quiet of my inbox, I saw a plan forming that kept the mission intact and gave my team a real chance to keep doing their work. I Am Man and the headlines hit like a cold wave the next morning. Ridgefield loses core IP, merger in jeopardy. The web and cable lit up with the story, and investors who'd been comfortable one day now sounded like men trying to patch a hull. I watched the feed while I drank bad office coffee and felt that slow, private satisfaction that comes when a small, quiet plan works the way it was supposed to. Charles read a prepared statement into cameras, voice steady but empty, and admitted the company had mishandled things. He apologized on record and announced that Connor had been terminated for acting without authorization. They made him the scapegoat and the symbol of a decision that cost the company dearly. The stock did what a wounded animal does, it lurched and fell. The board called emergency meetings where men in suits nodded at slide decks and used words like contingency and liquidity as if those words could stitch back trust. PR teams drafted narratives about restructuring and lessons learned, but words on paper don't pay engineers or secure channels. Ridgefield's leadership had to live with the fallout, and their options narrowed with every passing hour. I kept an eye on the filings and the press because the politics mattered in the long run, but I focused more on making sure the tech and the people behind it had someplace to go. Marlowe moved fast the way good organizations do when they see both risk and responsibility. Daniel called again and said simply, "We want to steward this properly." They put a licensing deal on the table that included a real equity stake for me and a structure that guaranteed work for the programs using the suite. The offer included employment deals for the engineers who actually built the encryption platform, with backdated vesting or protections for anyone who would lose value from leaving Ridgefield. Their legal team wrote clear clauses about control, non-transfer to foreign entities without consent, and stewardship over military contracts. They weren't just buying lines of code, they were offering a home for a mission. I negotiated the final terms like a man who remembers nights on watch and the smell of diesel on a cold deck, careful, practical, and thinking about people. Connor was permanently banned from any operational role that touched the suite. Charles had to make a public acknowledgement and apology that didn't spin facts away. Ridgefield engineers who wanted to move over got offers that kept their financial footing intact and promised meaningful roles at Marlowe. Those conditions mattered more than any headline or stock price because they protected the people and the purpose, not just an asset class. A month later, I sat in a corner office at Marlowe that felt like a small victory and a big responsibility at once. The view showed other buildings and the slow rise of a city that didn't stop because one company stumbled. My desk held the framed termination letter from Connor as a reminder, and next to it the simple plaque Hal founder had wanted, steward not seller. The office had space for our war room, secured test racks, and a whiteboard full of timelines and architectures. Around me were engineers I respected, some who'd worked with me for years and others new to the squad, all focused on building a next-generation encryption platform that learned from what we'd done and aimed higher. We rewired build systems to be more auditable, hardened the hardware security modules, and refactored the key exchange so it would be resilient even against emerging quantum threats. Meetings were direct and short because everyone knew what we were building mattered to people who didn't get headlines: sailors, pilots, intelligence teams in the field. I told the engineers often that the code we write can mean someone sleeps safer that night, and they nodded because they already felt it. The energy in that room was the opposite of Ridgefield's boardroom panic. It was steady, focused, and hungry to make the tech better. Claire called me one evening while I was walking back from the lab, voice bright in a way that washed away months of stress. "Dad," she said, "tuition's covered. I can breathe this semester." She sounded so proud I felt my chest tighten. I told her I'm proud of her too and that she should put her head down and finish what she started. Hearing it directly, knowing her worries were solved, made the long negotiation worth it in a way money never could. Being able to tell my daughter not to worry about school was a private victory I might hold longer than any stock certificate. The move preserved critical systems for the Navy and other services, exactly what Harold had wanted when he slipped that clause into a contract over Bourbon and stubborn conviction. Hal had believed engineers deserved protection from hurry and greed. He wanted the tech kept safe until people who understood it could decide its fate. That quiet logic had guided my choices, and watching the teams roll out updates for classified programs confirmed his faith. We kept the suite reliable, and we kept the people who knew it from being scattered for the sake of a quarter. People asked if I was lucky or if I'd planned every move. The truth was a mix: patience, a clause written by a founder who respected craft, and the willingness to use leverage to keep people safe. I tell this because sometimes being valuable isn't about clinging to a job, it's about protecting what matters and knowing when to step into a role that keeps a mission alive. The headlines moved on, but the work continued, and that was the point all along. I am man, and months after the transfer, Ridgefield finally folded under its own mistakes. Bankruptcy was a slow, ugly thing with lawyers in suits and bidders circling like vultures. The company's portfolio got parceled out in an auction, assets sold to pay creditors who'd been patient while executives chased a dream. Charles, CEO, retired quietly, the kind of exit that smells like someone talking his way out of a fire. Connor's son packed up and went west chasing a startup that never quite found traction. I heard about it from a news brief and a former colleague who thought it was fitting. My daughter Claire called the week everything settled, and I could hear relief in her voice like a tide going out. "Dad," she said, "I can focus now. I don't have to worry about tuition." Hearing her made the months of calls and negotiations feel worth it. My ex-wife called too, and her voice was soft on the other end. "I wanted to tell you I'm sorry for how things got ugly," she said. "You did right by Claire." That apology came without fanfare, but it mattered. People who'd been dragged through corporate drama started to talk like humans again, not lines on a spreadsheet. I kept a simple frame on my new desk at Marlowe with Connor's termination letter folded inside. I don't keep it to gloat. I keep it to remind myself of how fragile authority looks when someone decides power is a thing they can wield without knowledge. I tell young engineers who come by my desk something I heard Hal founder say years ago over Bourbon: read your contracts, know your worth, and be patient. They laugh because it sounds like old advice, but then I tell them the story and they stop laughing. Contracts are the scaffolding that keep messy deals from collapsing on people who actually do the work. The $95,000 bonus that Connor tried to block was a small number compared to what followed, but it was the trigger Hal designed into the contract. It wasn't about the money, I tell them bluntly. The bonus was the hinge, it moved the lock. The real payoff wasn't the check. The real payoff was being able to protect the technology from being sold off by people who saw it only as a line on a balance sheet. That technology protects sailors, pilots, and units in the field. Keeping that tech intact was the most valuable thing I could imagine doing with leverage. People ask if I planned everything to the letter and if I'd made moves like a chess master. The truth is cleaner and less flattering. I did my job well for decades, I read the contract Harold left me, and I didn't panic when a kid with a last name and a phone thought he could erase a lifetime of work with a stamp. Being prepared matters. Being technically sound matters. But being legally aware matters too. Engineers think code is bulletproof, but paper is the thing that often decides who can use that code and on what terms. Marlowe wanted stewardship, not a flip. They gave us resources to rebuild properly, not to harvest what could be harvested fast. We used that room and those budgets to refactor systems, to write tests that would survive audits, and to document assumptions so the next group wouldn't be blind to the trade-offs we had made. The team I pulled together were the people who'd written the suite and the people who had kept it running in the field. We gave them stability, and that stability let them build better things instead of patching damage control. Some nights I still think about those men and women who watched the press and wondered if they'd get paid, who worried about their stock vesting in their kids. I remember the faces in the lab when we told them we had offers that protected their work and their futures. I remember the way one young engineer, eyes tired from long builds, said quietly, "Thank you for not selling us out." That line stuck with me longer than any check or contract clause. If you ask me what's the lesson in all of this, I say it's simple and slow: trust the work, but don't trust the room. Learn the mechanics that protect your craft and build in safety nets that require more than someone's signature to move. Patience is not a passive thing. It's active. It looks like waiting for a legal trigger, a safe offer, or a chance to keep a team together instead of letting a quarterly report decide human lives. I found out the hard way that losing a job can be the start of the right kind of change if you are ready. People congratulated me for the outcome. Some called it luck. Some called it shrewd. I call it practical. I read my contracts. I kept my head. I kept thinking of the mission, not the money. That is the advice I give now when young engineers ask while standing in my doorway: read the paper you sign, know the value you bring, and when the chance comes, be patient enough to let conditions force the right outcome. That combination saved technology careers and, in some unknowable way, lives. I am Man, and this is the story I tell because it still matters. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. And drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.